Okay, Sherry.
Okay, got it. So welcome to all of you to our ongoing series on how the digital world impacts our privacy, our society, and our democracy. The League of Women Voters of Maine began this series last fall, and we have discussed many timely topics such as artificial intelligence, the nature of algorithms, combating extremism, court cases and the impact of Section 230 law, the role of social media in election disinformation, and so on. You can watch and listen to many of these conversations at the League of Women Voters Maine website, as Ann just mentioned. So I'm Sherry George with the League of Women Voter of Alaska, and from afar, we've been working with Maine to help organize and promote the education of our members and the public on what the social media and digital world mean to us as individuals and democracy. TikTok is our topic for today. 1 billion people use TikTok actively each month, 1 billion people. It is unique in ways, but I think as Julia will let us know, it joins a multitude of other social media businesses in its quest for information about us. Today, we're thrilled to have Julia join us to discuss TikTok, privacy, national security, the First Amendment, and anything else that she wishes to bring up to us. She is an award-winning investigative journalist and a New York Times contributing opinion writer. In 2018, she founded the Markup, a nonprofit newsroom that investigates the impacts of technology on society, and is entrepreneur in residence at Columbia Journalism School's Brown Institute. She's been a senior reporter at ProPublica and the Wall Street Journal, and for her reporting, she's been awarded the prestigious Gerald Loeb Award, which recognizes excellence in journalism, especially in the fields of business, finance, and the economy several times, and was on a team that won the Pulitzer Prize in explanatory reporting for coverage of corporate corruption. Julia is also the author of several books: Dragnet Nation, A Quest for Privacy, Security, and Freedom in a World of Relentless Surveillance. I guess we'll hear about that. And Stealing My Space, the battle to control the most popular website in America. She earned a BA in mathematics from University of Chicago and an MBA from the Graduate School of Business at Columbia University, and then became a journalist. So that was quite the transition. So welcome, Julia, and thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us and talk to everyone who's online. So please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I really appreciate the offer to speak, and I'm just a big fan of the fact that you guys do all this work to educate voters. That is so important. And so I don't have a huge slideshow. I just thought I would talk a little bit about my past, where I've come from, how I got into this topic, and talk to you a little bit about it, and then open it up for questions. So I grew up in Palo Alto in the 80s, which was the personal computer revolution. So my parents really moved there because they were excited about software. And back then it was very exciting because computers had gone from the size of like a room to the size of a desk. And so I grew up in that era. I learned to program in 5th grade. I really thought that there were only two professions, hardware and software. And I wasn't sure which one I wanted to go into, but I preferred software. And I went off to college and studied math because they didn't actually offer computer science as a major. So I did computer science as well. And I worked my summers at Hewlett Packard, and I really thought I would go into the tech industry. That was just sort of like the obvious thing that everyone I knew did. And by the way, everyone from my high school did, and they're all really rich. So, you know, that worked out for them. But I ended up falling in love with my campus newspaper. I'd actually joined it just because they needed someone who knew how to use software to lay out the ads. And so I knew how to do that. And so I spent some time just being paid to lay out the ads, using like a software program and then printing it out and stuff. But then I thought it seemed like fun to write some stories. So I started working as a reporter as well, and eventually realized that it was just such a fun thing. I thought I would do it for a living. So I went on to be a reporter, but I always thought maybe I'd come back to tech, like it was sort of like a youthful rebellion. But what happened was tech kind of came to me in the sense that, I graduated from college in 1992, and in 1996, the Netscape web browser came out and made, the internet and computers accessible to the public and useful in a way that hadn't been before. And so suddenly my stature as a reporter who understood computers was suddenly high. And so I'd previously been toiling away at this like sort of news wire in Washington, D.C., making $11,000 a year. And then all of a sudden in 1996, I was hired by the San Francisco Chronicle to cover tech because they were like, oh my gosh, you know how this stuff works. So I then have covered tech ever since. And I think that I really have had an advantage because I grew up with it and I wasn't scared of it, right? I wasn't, a lot of people who cover tech, and this is true to this day, cover it a little bit like sports. Like it's a, which team is winning, who's trading who, and which gadget is cooler. And there's definitely an aspect to that, but I was never interested in that. I was also one of the only women covering tech back then, and so I was just very interested in the impact on society and what this would all do. And to be completely honest with you, I was really optimistic. I fully bought into this idea that it was going to empower people and we were all going to be lifted up, and like there's a lot of truth to that, right? There's like, first of all, we wouldn't be talking here today without technology. And so it's made it possible for anyone to have a voice. Social media in particular has allowed people who really were ignored, and I say this as a journalist, but who were ignored by the mainstream press to have their voices heard. And so I am in my heart an optimist about technology and the power of it. But I think what I have spent my career doing is trying to mitigate the harms. And the thing is that there are harms, they're real harms. And because it's such a booming industry, this country has chosen to basically not regulate it at all. And we are now kind of alone in the world there, right? Like we're, I think, the only major industrialized nation that doesn't have a comprehensive privacy law that sets a baseline for like minimum standards across the board, right? We are, now falling behind Europe, which has a lot of regulations on the big tech platforms that are rolling out this year. But we're behind on all sorts of things, right? We don't really regulate this industry at all. And we've given them, as you mentioned, the Section 230 immunity from liability, so that they have a free pass for a lot of things that I think were not envisioned when that law was passed. And so I have spent my years as an investigative reporter almost always writing about the harms and the unintentional harms of this industry in the hopes that they would be repaired. In the past 6 months, I've joined the New York Times opinion page to write about possible solutions, because I actually think we are in the era where it's time to contemplate those solutions. There are a lot of ideas being bandied about, and I want to be in that conversation. And so I have written about, Section 230, which I've said should be reformed. I have written about why TikTok I don't think should be banned. And I most recently just wrote about how the EU rules that are really important rules for algorithmic transparency for the platforms should give some data access to journalists who have been on the front lines of really holding these companies to account. So I've written a bunch of things. Today I'm here to talk about TikTok, but I have to tell you, I'm happy to answer questions on anything because I am very old and I've covered a lot of things and I can answer questions about, whatever, just throw it at me. But let me start with TikTok, just because it sounds like you guys really wanted to hear about that, and I'm curious if anyone, I don't know if you guys can raise your hand, but how many people even use TikTok? Is anyone here like on it? A little bit. One person. So one hand. Two. Okay, two hands. So three. Okay, three hands. I love it. So I find TikTok joyful. I don't know if you guys have had the same experience, but it's definitely more joyful than going on Facebook or Twitter for me. It's less filled with politics and outrage and much more about dancing and people being nice and cute puppies and this and that. So and I have kids who are teenagers, so I have kids who are on TikTok all the time, right? Making videos, watching videos. And, I have a lot of friends in the national security industry area who say, you shouldn't use it, China, blah, blah, blah. But when, and I had sort of ignored those things for a long time. And then when the Biden administration actually started taking steps towards a ban, I decided to look into it and take it seriously. So I really went and investigated, like, well, what are the real concerns? Should I be concerned? Am I being too naive here? And the reality is that no one is willing to lay out the charges, right? Like there is a lot of like hand waving about what TikTok is, China is taking our data, et cetera. But like no one can point to any data that's been taken, and no one can point to anything specific except for like one time TikTok, I think, didn't show some videos about the Uyghur population, which is being repressed in China. And that was mentioned, and then they fixed it. And I think that like it's worth putting this in context. So the number of times that Facebook has done things like that is much, much higher, right? So when Facebook was enabling the government of Burma to spread lies about the Rohingyas, which then led to a massacre, that they also apologized, but like it was a lot bigger harm. And so I started to feel like I wanted to put this whole issue into context, which is two things that I think are really the key issues with these. One, are they taking our data, and is something bad going to happen to it? And two, are they using their power as algorithmic overseers to shape the narrative of what we see in some way that is politically beneficial to China? So let's take those in order. So first of all, are they taking our data and doing something bad with it? Maybe. So is every other app, right? So every app on your phone has access to all sorts of stuff, where you are in your geographical location, your login information, whatever you've provided them about yourself. A lot of these apps will also try to track you outside of the app. So if you log into Facebook, it also tracks you across the internet if you go other places. Apple has tried to limit a lot of the tracking, so some apps are less invasive than they used to be. But TikTok takes no more, no less than the average app. And people who have run tests have said that it's not extracting additional information beyond what it says. So, from what I can tell, it's exactly as privacy invasive as most of the other apps out there. And given that our country has refused to pass a baseline privacy law that would limit what apps can take, they're acting within the realm of everyone else. So I would say the privacy issue, while not good, is pretty much on par with all the rest of the social media networks. And I feel like the solution to that problem is to pass a comprehensive privacy law. We had a bipartisan bill, the ADPPA, that was pretty close last Congress, and it's pretty shocking that it is one of the few bipartisan issues in Congress that really does seem like it could happen, and yet continues to fail to happen. And I think it's worth noting that the big tech companies are extremely, they give a lot of money in campaign finance contributions, and they have a lot of power in DC. So, I would like to see privacy law pass, but it's surprising, and it's honestly embarrassing for the US at this point that we haven't passed one. It's caused a lot of problems with Europe, by the way, because they have such strong privacy laws. So it's actually hard for corporations to assure their European partners that the data is kept safe when it's here. Okay, so then let's talk about algorithmic amplification, right? That is definitely a challenge. The companies that own social media platforms have a lot of power to shape what we see. According to Pew, which research institute, I think 85% of people get news through their social media news feeds. That's a lot. And honestly, any autocratic or despot government would have loved the power to shape what information its citizens could see. This is a very important power that these companies have. And it's hard. It's hard to shepherd it well, right? You get lobbied. They get lobbied by both sides, saying, you know, you're giving too much airtime to the conservatives. You're giving too much airtime to the liberals. Fix your algorithms. That's actually one reason it's a bipartisan issue to regulate big tech, because basically both sides of the political spectrum feel like they're not getting they're not getting amplified as much as they want from these algorithms. And so, of course, the question of China controlling an algorithm that shapes what every kid in America is watching is a little bit disturbing, right? But the thing that's interesting about TikTok is that they had actually agreed to this sort of unprecedented deal to allow the U.S. government to oversee their algorithm and inspect it, which no other social media platform has agreed to, or probably ever would. And so I think that in the absence of evidence that they're using their algorithm to shape things incorrectly, and then also the fact that they were going to submit to this oversight, I felt like the damage that TikTok is doing doesn't seem really that different, right, from Facebook. So for instance, Facebook, during the run up to the 2020 election, they had promised Congress that they would stop recommending that users join political groups. They said during the period of the election, we're going to stop doing that because it's just too partisan. We don't want to recommend, you know, join this partisan group, that partisan group. So they said they would turn it off. Mark Zuckerberg testified himself to Congress saying that. Then they did not. My investigative journalist at the Markup found that they did not turn that off. And in fact, but as far as we could tell, they just recommended conservative groups to conservative voters. And so essentially in the run up to the January 6th insurrection, they were recommending really partisan groups. So to Republican voters, and many of those groups were involved in actually organizing the event. So Facebook has actually used its algorithms. Like, we have evidence that they've used it in a way that's very polarizing, and, you know, like literally was intended to overthrow our democracy. So I guess the question I have about algorithmic oversight is, what is the reason that we think we have to do this for TikTok but not for Facebook? And I think that's the question that I would want to ask. And I think that the European model is a really good one. The Europeans have an interesting set of laws that are rolling out this year. And what they've asked the companies to do is to conduct their own risk assessments. How do they believe their algorithms are affecting democracy? And not just democracy, they have a couple other metrics: how they're affecting youth, how they're affecting, I think it's a couple other things, minors. And so those companies have to do a risk assessment, just like, you know, a company would have to do an environmental risk assessment before building somewhere, and then submit those to the regulators. The regulators will look at it and say, okay, how are you mitigating these risks? And they have to prove that they're mitigating those risks. So I think there is a way to do some sort of algorithmic oversight without running afoul of the First Amendment, without running afoul of all the freedoms that we have here in the US, but like asking these companies to do a self-assessed risk assessment seems like a pretty basic first step. And so I guess I would say, if we're worried about that with TikTok, and we don't think that this plan that they voluntarily submitted to have the US government actually inspect their algorithms, which to be honest is a really weird situation, I still think there's a way that we could model after the Europeans and try to ask all of these platforms to really assess the risks of their algorithms, because we know that there are risks. And we know from Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, who shared with us that at Facebook, many of these risks were known and ignored, right? And so we know that they know about them and they're not doing anything about it. And I'll tell you, the reason they're not doing anything about it is because there's no liability, right? That's the only thing that matters in this country, is liability, right? And so if they don't have liability, they're not going to fix it, right? And so they need to have liability. And that's the only way that, once you get the lawyers involved, then, you know, something will happen. And so I'm in favor of bringing in the lawyers. So that's my sort of just quick talk, and I'd love to answer questions.
Hi, Judy, this is Sherry, and I'm looking at the questions now that are coming in. So here's one. What are the real chances of passing a comprehensive privacy law in your, let me see, I lost my place here.
Oh, I have it here.
Privacy law in our country, given that it seems useful, that users may take violation of privacy as a trade-off for the value they find in a particular app, and the huge amount of money that social media moguls have to bring to the public discussion.
That's a good question. When I first started writing about privacy issues in 2010, everybody said to me, I launched an investigative series at the Wall Street Journal then called What They Know. And people said to me, no one cares. Everyone has agreed to give this information, and it is their choice. They don't have to use these platforms. It's a voluntary thing that they're doing. And I think the narrative has really changed, actually. I think that since then, we've seen so many privacy violations. We've seen that no company can keep our data safe, right? Facebook was like, oops, we just gave it to Cambridge Analytica, and they gave it to the Trump organization, like, oops. And it's not just them, right? Target was like, oops, we lost everybody's data. So we have learned that these companies are not trustworthy with our data. And I would say that I hear from people that and the data shows that people are really concerned about it. They just don't have any ability to do anything about it, right? The thing is, you can be concerned about something, but if you have no agency, what can you do, right? It's not actually realistic to not participate in our tech-mediated society. And so I think that there's actually a huge amount of public support for privacy protections. And California is a perfect example of that. So California had a ballot initiative to pass an extremely rigorous privacy law, the California Privacy Regulation, CPRA. I don't know what it stands for. Anyways, it was meant to match actually the European GDPR, which is this really strict privacy law that Europe passed, which the US has failed to match. But California, the voters, 70% passed this law overwhelmingly because privacy is actually really popular. It's just that no one ever gets a chance to vote on it. Candidates don't run on a privacy wedge issue, right? They go and run on guns, they run on abortion, and they run on, these days trans youth or whatever. But there isn't a privacy candidate you can choose. And so I feel like there's a mismatch between what people really care about and what our lawmakers are doing.
Yeah, wow. So another one came in. How can we possibly know who and what to trust? What are the determinants of trust in this area? And I think one of our other questions that come in earlier was about the ethical rules that journalism has to follow. But it seems like all of the platforms are exempt, and those who post on the platform are also exempt. So how do you find out how to trust? How do you enforce trust at all? Or can you? We just have to make up our own minds.
Yeah. It's a really hard information environment right now because, we moved from an era of having, I think, somewhat trusted gatekeepers, right? The reality is that when I was growing up, I'd go to a newsstand and I'd pick a bunch of magazines, but none of them had total lies in them because, they could be sued, right? Because that is the way, liability, as I said, is everything, right? So journalists, no matter how maybe ill-intentioned they might be, we are all very worried all the time about being sued for defamation and libel. And so we have lawyers who read our stuff before it goes out, and we ask people for comment because we want to make sure that we're getting the story right. And that is our code, and it's enforced by the fact that we have this real legal risk. And it really is just shocking to me that these tech platforms that mint money and have the biggest profit margins of all time don't have to worry about that at all, right? They assert that not only can they run lies that users write, which I think is maybe okay, right? The reason Section 230 was passed because these companies didn't want to be sued if Joey wrote on their page on Facebook some lie, right? And that makes sense, right? The defamation of every single person writing some crazy thing on their page makes sense. But they now assert that they don't have any liability for the fact that they run ads that are wrong or illegal or frauds or scams or filled with lies. Or they had for 7 years, I was writing about how Facebook was offering discriminatory ads. So they basically would offer advertisers the ability to just say, I don't want my ads to be shown to any Black people. And they had a drop down menu, and it was like who to exclude from viewing your ads. And you could just literally choose by race. And, that's just a complete violation of the law when you're talking about housing and employment and credit, right? Which are key areas of civil rights protections. And Facebook had that for years. They finally have been cracking down, but only after 7 years of journalists and lawsuits against it. So I guess the thing is that there's just no, it's not, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's not you, the reason you can't trust anything. We're in an environment that is designed to not be trustworthy, right? And so I guess the challenge here is you have to do the work yourself. And that is really hard, right? Like, I as a journalist know, okay, I trust this outlet, but actually it's even worse than that. Like these days, it's like I trust this journalist at this outlet, but not even necessarily everyone at that outlet. And so it's really a difficult environment, which is why I actually believe in making journalism more and more transparent. So at the Markup, which I founded, we just published our methodology, how we did our work, and we're just extremely transparent about it. And I do think that like that is what I think the future will require, because there's no way to prove trust anymore just through like a marker of like, oh, I'm a well-known brand, especially with journalism where a lot of news outlets have been bought. Like Newsweek used to be a really well-known brand, and then it was bought by some group that just actually publishes untrue things all the time. So it just is very it's a challenging environment. Oh gosh, the questions are piling up, so I better stop talking.
No, it's all really fascinating. I think we're all interested in all your insights on this. Next from Dan here, Oregon just passed legislation to ban TikTok installation on state-owned laptops, etc. League of Women Voters of Oregon should be looking at proposals to negotiate for a 2025 session. What should we be aiming for?
It's a great question. I don't know how I feel about the bans on state-owned and federally owned equipment. I do think it's perfectly reasonable for an employer to say, I don't want certain things on my devices, and to control those devices. The federal government has done that for years, right? You can't install all sorts of things because of security risks. And so I know that there's a First Amendment lawsuit right now in Texas against the Texas ban on state-owned equipment and TikTok, because the allegation there is that researchers at the universities need to access TikTok in order to study it and this and that. And so I think there are reasonable exceptions to be made, but I guess I would say if you're looking for proposals to pick, I would say that when it's company equipment, it's like a little bit less of a concern, in my opinion. I think the things I'm concerned about are much more like rampant facial recognition, location information. Those are very scary. And there's not much regulation because we don't have privacy legislation, federal privacy legislation that just like sets a floor. There's, rampant use of facial recognition by commercial entities. There's people who use it for stalkers. There's like, it's bad. So I think I would pick privacy laws. So one thing that is happening, because the DC has failed to pass federal privacy law, most states are now trying to pass privacy laws. And the thing that's really upsetting is that in many, many states, the tech company lobbyists are just writing those laws. And so California has a really, really strong law, and most other states that have passed them have weaker ones. And so I guess I would say, like, I would lean towards more states trying to pass laws that mimic California's law.
Next up is, what are the comparative demographics of Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and now Threads users? How will AI, well, this is a multi-part question.
Oh, this is a lot of questions. Okay.
How will AI impact social media? And we know Zuckerberg, Musk, but who is the person who is TikTok? And third or fourth, what about the effect of social media on attention span? You can you have a chance to look at these questions also, so you can get to the multi parts.
That's a lot of parts. Okay, I'll start with the demographics. As you all maybe know, Facebook is for the old. My kids will not touch that thing. They are just like, that is old people stuff. I'm not using it. So I think that's why Facebook bought, Instagram and WhatsApp, because they needed like a youth offering. And so I do think it's an interesting question about Threads, their new Twitter competitor, right? Whether it's going to be for the olds or whether the youngs will come because, because they have like, they're not cool anymore, and so the kids don't like that. The question of who is TikTok is a good one. It was created by a company in China, and actually, I don't recall the name of the founder, but it is a less of a single personality driven type company than what we see with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. And that's, I think, partly because of the corporate structure, right? The US version is somewhat independent and run by the guy who testified in Congress, Shu. So I think it's a slightly different game than the way that our boy billionaires run their businesses here. Next question. Attention span on social media. That is such a good question. So I think we're in the midst of like a worldwide panic, honestly, about the impact of social media on children. And there's a lot of regulations and concerns about like banning social media under certain age groups, etc., because of what's doing to people's brains. And I think the reality is we don't really know. There is been a rise in teen suicide attempts and mental health issues in the past several years, and some researchers have tried to link that to social media usage. I don't think that the data is fully compelling. It's not a causal link, it's a correlation. And the reality is there are a lot of other things that also could be contributing. And we have also seen previous spikes in teen suicides in the past that weren't linked to social media usage. So my kids would tell you that social media is addictive, that they have to limit themselves. But the reason they're depressed is because the climate's burning and they're afraid of being shot in school. So, and those seem like legitimate reasons to be worried about life. So I guess I tend to be a little bit skeptical of the social media alarmism. I'm not saying there aren't problems. I've spent much of my career trying to chronicle the problems, but I just don't think we know for sure that it's actually doing something, super sinister to people's brains.
Next one up, I've heard that people are exiting social media. I myself have dialed way back on Facebook and spend more time simply reading on Medium, etc. Do you think that people themselves might eventually overthrow social media and thereby diminish it? Or the genie is here to stay and create global havoc?
It's a good question. Certainly Twitter is seeing a massive decline in usage despite what Elon Musk claims. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he took it over and then started doing a lot of really controversial things, like letting accounts who were abusive and had white supremacist beliefs back on and letting them be unfettered and then giving them special badges, so he's definitely made that platform a much less hospitable environment. And so I know a lot of people have left Twitter. And Facebook, I think, has been on a sort of slow decline, although the numbers are still pretty high for usage. But like because of the not cool factor, I think that they are losing the important youth vote. But overall, I think what we're in is a weird period right now of fracturing of social media. There's just so many new platforms. There's Threads, there's Mastodon, there's Blue Sky. The other day, when my latest New York Times piece published, I said to my daughter, I was like, I said, I cannot believe I'm saying these words, but I first have to go tweet, then I have to toot, which is what you do on Mastodon, and then I have to skeet on Blue Sky. And she was like, you're making this up. Like, these are not real words. And I was like, I literally am not lying to you. These are the things I need to do. So, so I think it's an interesting moment. I mean, I think it's probably good, right? Like, as a person who believes in markets, I think competition is good. So more social networks competing with each other on quality is a good thing. But the problem is that social networks are useful because of scale, right? The reason you go there is because everyone else is there. So all these small social networks end up being really costly. Like for someone like me who's just trying to get their work out there, I have to spend 2 hours posting on each one of these things every time I publish something, right? Because it's just a complete nightmare. So I don't know that this era we're in of fracturing of social media will continue. I think there'll probably be a reconsolidation, right? If history is any guide. But I do hope that we try to set some minimum standards for what we expect out of these social networks. And maybe what competition will do is show these companies what users want. And what they want is actually a clean, well-edited space to have a reasonable conversation and not be chased around by trolls.
Next one up is Edward Tufte, a professor of political science at Yale, once said there are only two industries that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. Do you think that social media companies like TikTok are using their customers in that sense?
Oh, that's such a great quote. I can't believe I hadn't heard it before. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's the famous line, right? That if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? And so that is sort of the social media bargain, is that it's quote free, but then they take your data and they're selling your attention, right? That is the way they monetize, is that I can get an ad in front of you, and I can get you to stay on this platform longer and look at more ads by sending you more and more outrageous content that you just can't look away with from, like a car crash. And so ultimately, I'm not even sure that the word, the user word is the problem. I think I'm more persuaded by the idea of this engagement model, that the longer you stay on, the more they make money, is the problem, because that is actually what is so toxic. Because if engagement is always going to be what we want, then the human brain is wired for fear, right? It's wired for anger. It's wired to be worried about a bear jumping out at us. And so as long as they keep showing us bears, we're going to be there. And so I think that model of engagement is really toxic. And I don't think that was true back when software was sold in boxes, right? Like I used to go to the store and buy a box, shrink wrapped, right? Remember that, with software inside? And that was like nice. Remember all those games? Remember we were like the one with the wagon and you were trying to survive the Oregon Trail. I mean, those ones, I don't feel like that was toxic, right? So I feel like there is a way to have a software world that is not toxic. I just don't think it works with the engagement model.
Yeah, it does seem that the whole piece that we're triggered by anger, we're triggered by hate, we're triggered by, the more those things get amped up, the more likely we are to keep clicking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least that's what the research shows.
Yeah.
And then therefore you lead to more and greater toxic information being funneled to you, or you just being subject of or subjected to. So yeah, it's a very confusing world.
It is confusing. Yes.
Oregon has lots of good questions here. League of Women Voters Oregon has a new youth council, much more involved in social media platforms, not used by older members. I see yet some young people in this group. Some of us more like me. Let's see. Ideas for navigating successful engagement with these new young members with completely different comfort zones. I remember a board suggesting to pre-approve every Facebook post. Their work will reflect our reputation.
Yeah, this
So,
is something that a lot of organizations have faced, right? Is that the normal editorial model of like things going through all this approval before they get published, it doesn't work for those fast moving social media platforms. And so a lot of organizations, and this is true for news organizations too, right? That we have to, we are concerned about being accurate. And so one thing I always did when I ran my news organization was I did approve every social media post because we didn't want to be sued. But that's because they were about serious topics. And people, we're often saying that somebody did a bad thing. So you want to be really accurate about that. But I think that one thing that is nice about today's world is that there's an understanding now that when a post goes up, like a lot of brands have young social media managers who make jokes, and they even might indicate like, I'm not necessarily this is a joke by me, the person writing this, but I'm not the one, this isn't actually like the brand's opinion. And I think there's a little bit of looseness, and that is okay these days. And so I guess I would say, since, as I understand it, I think you guys are trying to engage with voters, it's a great way to engage. And so I would highly recommend it. And I will say that TikTok is actually a great place to do that. There are not that many politicians right now who are doing serious engagement on TikTok, and the ones who are, I think, are really getting it's really effective. And I think it's going to be a really important place for engagement, because it's such a perfect format. You look at somebody's face and it's like 2 minutes. It's kind of all you want to hear from a politician. And so I think it's a great way to bring public issues to public consciousness.
okay. We have long understood, just from one of the main members, we have long understood that negativity attracts eyeballs for longer and thus is financially valuable. In my experience, TikTok seems to have found an algorithm that's not quite as focused on extreme content or negativity. Setting aside for a moment the numerous other concerns, do you think there is something in TikTok's unique algorithm that we can learn from?
Yeah, it's such a great point. People are really excited about TikTok's algorithm. They're like, it's magic, it's incredible. Like, how does it know all these things about me? And actually, the answer is pretty simple. Like, it is getting more information about you because the videos are short and they're super easy to swipe through, right? So the vertical format where each video is on top of the next, and you just swipe to get to the next one, means that they're getting more information about what you like and dislike than YouTube, because YouTube's are horizontal and usually 10 minutes, because that's how much time it takes to get like an ad, and they want to monetize. So they're like 7 to 10 minutes. And then the next one is to the right, and you might not go there. And so YouTube is just learning less about what you want, right? They're not getting the volume of information about you. So TikTok can just more easily learn because it's showing you a bunch of things and you're quickly saying yes, no, yes, no. And that's where you get to a situation where my TikTok feed is literally like all these people giving me mental health affirmations. They're like, you're great, you're amazing, go girl. And so like I have found myself into some sort of wonderful area of TikTok, which is just all positive affirmations. Quite happy with it.
So it's a combination of the format then, which allows them to collect more information about us, along with whatever's on the back end that's quote unquote making the decisions.
Right. But the thing is,
certain things they must weigh certain things more than others, or I'm guessing they do.
Yeah, but think about 2-minute videos, right? You can see in half an hour a lot of 2-minute videos. And if you're looking at a 10-minute YouTube video in half an hour, you see 3, right? So the fact is the volume is that's how algorithms learn. The more data they have, the more they learn, right? That's why these the chat GPT it's called a large language model, because it basically had enough language. I had to have so much language to be able to do its work. So these systems require huge volumes of information. And so that I think that hypothesis that I've heard about why TikTok's algorithm is so good is that it's mostly about the fact that they had just have such a high volume of information. Makes sense to me, but no one knows really because we can't see the algorithm.
We can't see anybody's algorithm, right?
Nope.
Because not academics, not oversight groups, not anybody. Actually, I'm going to throw one question in here that sort of fits with that. Are there reputable nonpartisan organizations that are doing the deep dive on social media and its effects on undermining human rights and civil liberties? So groups that, like folks in this group, could end up following, going to, researching, ones that are, you mentioned the Pew Research Institute at one point here, but organizations like that, that might be good for some of us to be able to follow.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's weird, right? Because the tech space is like most of there isn't a huge independent kind of research area for big tech the way that there is for the environment. So one thing I've really always been jealous of is like with the environment, you have the National Wildlife Council and you have the Earth Defenders and there's so many. In tech, there are a few advocacy groups, but they're really small because there's not a lot of funding for them, and they don't have cute panda bears to raise money from, and there's a lot of them that take money from tech, right? So there's really a paucity of independent voices here. Georgetown just started a new tech advocacy group in part to address this issue, to try to have one that's independent, but it's not up and running yet. There are a few that are helpful, like Electronic Frontier Foundation. They do a lot about government surveillance, not as much about commercial though. There's the Center for Democracy and Technology, which is in DC and does a very a very measured approach to this question of what are the things that we should be concerned about, but they do take money from tech. There's a group called Data and Society that does some nice, more academic think papers that I like about what to think about in this area. And there's something called the AI Now Institute, which has been thinking about AI and the implications. So there's a few, but they're really small and underfunded. So you should also tell all your billionaire friends to give them money.
You're the one with all the billionaire friends. We will. Let's see here. How can journalism be mandated to be transparent?
Well, I don't think that mandating journalism to be anything is going to work with the First Amendment, right? So the government should not be in the business of regulating journalism. But I do wish that journalism could be a little bit better at setting its own standards, right? We don't have a professional association like the American Bar Association or AMA. You can't get kicked out of journalism, the way you can get disbarred. I'm not sure that I would advocate for that level, but I do think that it would be nice if we had some standards. There are some groups working on this. There's a group called the Trust Project that's rates journalism outlets based on whether they do certain things that are trustworthy. And I think that's a great effort, and I really support that. So I would like to see more efforts like that really help the public understand which outlets are using best practices and which ones are, honestly, some places are just using the banner of journalism to do things that I wouldn't consider journalism.
Okay. There's so many here. I'm scrolling down through them. Here's another one from Oregon. I'm going to be going back and forth here, so folks don't think I'm skipping your questions.
More Oregon, my God.
The Nova PBS coverage of TikTok implied that older faces would never compete in their algorithm, discouraging as a platform for League of Women Voters to get voting info out. Do you agree?
No, absolutely not. I watch all sorts of old people on TikTok. One of my favorites is like an old woman Buddhist nun who gives me like Buddhist thinking all the time. There's yeah, I don't think that's true. I mean, I would like to see it tested. Maybe Nova did an experiment and found some evidence for this, and maybe I'm wrong, but certainly my own anecdotal experience is that it's not true. So, and also that's the beauty of TikTok and the algorithm is like it probably would appeal to some people, right? It's very much like it gets customized to the people who want to see it. So it, you know, it's good at finding the audience that would be interested.
Here's another one. What do you think of Kara Swisher? A, and B, I've never been on TikTok. I'll take your word for it. It is joyful. How has it accomplished that?
So Kara and I worked together for years at the Wall Street Journal, and I know her and like her, and she is, I sort of have stepped into her shoes a little bit because she left New York Times Opinion, and now I'm writing the tech opinion pieces that she used to write there. So I think I see myself a little bit in her footsteps. I think that she has a very, she's a very intense interviewer. So I think for those of you who watch her interview people on podcasts, she's like a tough interviewer. She's very much like a broadcaster, and that's a real broadcast personality, is to do the tough interviews. And I think that's a really important skill. It's not a skill I have. My skill is totally different. Like I don't have a performative style for interviews. I just sit there and ask you questions for so long that you get exhausted and tell me the thing. But that's because I'm a print reporter. So I have like, I can spend 3 hours and then I distill it into some print words, whereas she has that ability to do it in a more, on stage in a way that like gets it done in 45 minutes. So I think that's a really great skill and I really admire her. And I think she and I have like been traveling this road of technology reporting together for a long time, as often as the only kind of high profile women. And so I really appreciate that. I do disagree with her though about TikTok. So she did say that she took it off her phone and she doesn't want to use it because of China. And I don't agree with that, right? Like I do think that that is, I don't think there's evidence for that.
Okay, going back and forth here, does social media enhance, decrease, or destroy the possibility of relationships in society?
Oh my gosh. So there is some studies about this that are really interesting, which is that people are less lonely with, they're less bored because of social media, but they're more lonely. So the thing is that like they're in their rooms more, maybe alone. So they're lonely, but they're not bored because they're constantly being entertained by social media. Another thing that's kind of interesting is there's a lot of violence that has decreased. So child sexual abuse and teen pregnancies are all down historically. And it's possible, one hypothesis is like everyone's just in their room, so they're not beating each other up and getting pregnant. I mean, I don't know. I'm just telling you what the numbers are out there. Okay. So there's interesting things that are out there that we don't know how correlated they are. And it's actually an interesting thing. But one thing about social media that is weird is that it encourages a sort of parasocial relationships where you feel really invested in people who you don't know. Right. And that I think was not really true with there was maybe there would be people who got really invested in like a Hollywood star, but there was a limit to what you could find out about them. Like you had to wait for the next issue of People magazine. Now, you can follow someone's Instagram feed and really feel like you're really like living life alongside them. And that I think does lead to some weird things for both parties, right? I think for the celebrities, I think it can be very scary because there's a lot of people who assume a relationship and they have stalkers and they have people really trying to invade their space. And I think it's also not that healthy for the people who are involved in it. They lose track of these things. So I think there's this article that was in the Atlantic, I think 10 years ago, that was really, I think, prescient. It said, in the future, everyone will be famous, but no one will know who anyone is. And I think it's sort of true. Like, everyone will have like some of the problems of fame. Like even if you're mini famous, like person might get obsessed with you. And so it's a weird world that I don't think we all know how to navigate.
And I was just recently reading an article in the Christian Science Monitor, and it was a story about a teenage girl, and she said she got off of social media more because she realized hanging out with her friends meant sitting in a room with all of them scrolling on their phone, and they weren't really interacting with each other. They were together in the same room, so therefore hanging out, but they were each individually scrolling on their own phone
Oh,
and
yeah,
therefore
this is
not
like
interacting.
my kids do this all the time. Their friends come over and they just sit on their phone. It's wild. Um, I do have to run in 1 minute, but
Okay. Well, we're right at the time anyway. So there were a few more questions. We got through most of them. So thank you so much, Julia, for coming on and all your insights on such a wide variety of topics, not just TikTok, but I mean, I think many of us are guardedly optimistic for the future, but we want to be working towards making it better
yeah,
for everyone and protecting privacy and making sure our elections and our democracy are not really impinged.
yep.
This was a
Gerald,
great conversation, Julia. Thank you so much for joining us.
thank you. It was a real pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
Appreciate it so much. Thank you all in the audience for joining. If you want to look for the video, at least wait till tomorrow. We'll post it. We'll try to post it tomorrow and send around a message. So thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.